I was in my early 30s when I met Ethan. At the time, life felt like it was finally starting to make sense. I had a stable job as a graphic designer, lived in a cozy apartment downtown, and was finally at peace with being single after a string of forgettable relationships. I wasn't even looking for anything serious when I first met him. I was just out with a few friends at a local art exhibit, sipping cheap wine and pretending to understand abstract shapes on canvas, when he walked up to me and made a joke about one of the paintings. It was dry, clever, and completely unexpected. I laughed, he smiled, and just like that, something clicked. Ethan was the kind of man who could make anyone feel like the most interesting person in the room. He was charming without trying too hard, funny without being obnoxious, and deeply attentive in a way that made you feel truly seen. From our very first conversation, he remembered the smallest things I said. My favorite childhood cartoon. The exact way I liked my coffee. Even the obscure fonts I preferred when designing logos. It felt like he listened in a way no one else ever had. He asked questions, offered genuine compliments, and never once checked his phone while we were talking. That alone felt like a miracle in today's world. Things moved fast between us, but it never felt rushed. After a month of dating, we were already inseparable. He would bring me breakfast before I headed to work, leave sticky notes with sweet messages around my apartment, and text me goodnight even if we had spent the whole day together. He met my friends within the first few weeks, and they all loved him. My best friend Lena said he was almost too perfect. I laughed it off. It was easy to believe I had just gotten lucky. We posted pictures together, went on weekend trips, celebrated tiny milestones like our 1-month anniversary. To everyone else, we looked like the couple who had it all figured out. Even I believed it. I told myself I finally understood what healthy love looked like. He said all the right things, did all the romantic gestures you only see in movies, and always made me feel like a priority. When we decided to move in together 6 months into the relationship, it felt like the most natural next step. We were happy. Or at least, that's what I thought. Looking back now, the signs were all there. I just didn't want to see them. Ethan had a way of making even the most ordinary days feel like something out of a romantic novel. He'd surprise me with flowers at my office. Not just the generic kind, but carefully chosen bouquets with my favorite peonies and sprigs of lavender, because I once mentioned I liked the smell. He left little notes on the fridge every morning, handwritten with things like, "Good luck with your meeting," or "Can't wait to see your smile tonight." It was the kind of sweetness that made you feel like the main character in your own love story. I remember waking up one morning to find he'd made me breakfast, complete with heart-shaped pancakes. I laughed at the cheesiness, but deep down, I loved every second of it. What really drew me in was how much we seemed to have in common. He liked the same obscure indie bands I did, claimed he hated crowded bars just like me, and even watched the same guilty pleasure reality show I never admitted to anyone else. We had inside jokes, matching playlists, and a shared Pinterest board for dream vacation spots. It felt like I had met my other half, someone who just got me. Every quirk, every preference, every weird little habit I thought made me unlovable. He embraced it all. I genuinely believed I had found my soulmate. So when he suggested we move in together after 6 months, I didn't hesitate. I thought, why not? We were already spending every night together, practically living at each other's places anyway. Moving in just felt like the next chapter in our love story. I was nervous, sure, but also excited. I imagined a life filled with cozy Sunday mornings, shared routines, and deep conversations over dinner. I truly believed we were building something real. I remember the look on Lena's face when I told her. It wasn't excitement, it was concern. She didn't say anything outright at first, but later that night, over drinks, she told me she thought everything was moving too fast. "It's a little intense, don't you think?" she said gently. "People usually wait longer to really get to know each other." But I brushed it off. In my head, she just didn't understand. Maybe she was being overly cautious. Maybe she was jealous. I was in love, and to me, everything felt right. As the months went on, I started noticing small things that didn't quite sit right. At first, I brushed them off. After all, nothing big had changed. But when I really thought about it, the cracks began to show. Ethan, once so open and relaxed, had become oddly protective of his phone. It started with the little things. He would always leave it face down on the table, the screen never visible. If I reached for it to check the time, he'd suddenly get up to do something else. If I needed to borrow it to make a quick call, he'd hesitate, then hand it to me with an awkward smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. But I told myself I was being paranoid. After all, we were in a committed relationship, right? We trusted each other. Still, something about that secrecy nagged at me. Then there were the late nights. At first, it made sense. He worked in sales and had to make presentations and deal with clients at odd hours. But as time went on, the late nights became more frequent. Sometimes he wouldn't even tell me what he was working on. "Just a few things left to finish up," he'd say, brushing it off with a quick kiss on my cheek. But it felt different now. His words didn't match his actions. He was less present, distracted even when he was at home, staring off into space like his mind was somewhere else. The little texts that used to arrive throughout the day slowed down, and when they did come, they were brief. "I'm busy. Sorry." The excuses started adding up. "Guys' night," he'd say, or sometimes it was catching up with a friend from college. He'd leave, sometimes without much explanation, and I would stay behind, staring at the space where he had been, trying not to overthink things. But I couldn't help it. It felt like he was pulling away. Yet every time my mind started to spiral, he would come home with a gift, a new book he thought I'd like, or tickets to a concert of one of my favorite bands. He'd be sweet again, affectionate, and everything would feel normal for a while. And I'd feel guilty for even considering that something might be wrong. After all, didn't he just bring me flowers last week? Didn't he spend hours helping me rearrange the furniture in our living room? He was still the same guy who held me close on cold nights, who laughed at my silly jokes. Maybe I was just overreacting. Maybe I was letting the little things get to me because of my own insecurities. I pushed my doubts down, buried them under memories of the early days, when everything had felt perfect. The red flags were there. I could see them now, but at the time, I was convinced they were just my imagination. It wasn't just the phone, the late nights, or the vague excuses anymore. It was everything. Ethan started pulling away, not just physically, but emotionally too. The small gestures of affection that once felt so natural. A hand on my back as we watched TV, a kiss goodnight before he fell asleep, all began to fade. The intimacy between us, both emotional and physical, became more infrequent, as if he was withdrawing into himself. It wasn't like we stopped talking altogether, but something was different. We would go days without real conversations about our lives, about our dreams, or even about simple things like how our day had been. It felt like I was living with a stranger who just happened to know my name. The tension between us grew, and instead of talking about it, Ethan started picking fights over the smallest things. He'd snap at me for leaving a dish in the sink or for not letting him pick the movie on our date night. At first, I thought it was just stress from work, or maybe he was going through something. But after a while, it felt like he was deliberately looking for reasons to argue. It was exhausting. Nothing I did seemed right, and the more I tried to make things better, the worse it seemed to get. I found myself walking on eggshells, trying not to trigger his mood swings. And then, just when I thought things couldn't feel more distant, he started giving me extravagant gifts. Gifts that felt almost like an apology, but he never said sorry. A new camera lens for my photography hobby, a designer handbag I had admired months ago, an expensive necklace I didn't even need. It was confusing. He'd been distant for days, then suddenly, he'd shower me with these over-the-top tokens of affection, as if trying to make up for something, though he never admitted anything was wrong. It didn't make sense. The gifts felt like Band-Aids over a wound that wasn't healing, and the mixed signals left me feeling more lost than ever. That's when the gaslighting began. At first, it was subtle. He'd tell me I was being too sensitive when I pointed out how cold he'd been. "You're imagining things," he'd say, his tone so calm, so convincing. "I'm just busy. You know I'm always here for you." But the words didn't match the actions. And when I would try to explain how I was feeling, he'd dismiss it with a laugh, as if it were all in my head. It started to chip away at my confidence. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I was just being irrational. I needed to make sense of everything, so I started journaling. I couldn't talk to him about it without feeling like I was being crazy, so I began writing down everything I noticed, the arguments, the gifts, the moments of affection followed by long stretches of distance. It helped me make sense of my feelings, even if it didn't make the situation any clearer. As the pages filled with my thoughts, a pattern began to emerge. It was like I was looking at the truth from a distance, unable to ignore the signs that had been there all along. But still, I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to believe that the man I had trusted, the man I had built a life with, was capable of doing this to me. It was one of those ordinary evenings that turned into something unforgettable. I had come home from work, eager to relax after a long day, but something felt off the moment I stepped into our apartment. The air was different, thick with an unfamiliar scent. It wasn't a bad smell, just new, floral, almost musky. It didn't belong. At first, I told myself it was nothing, maybe one of the candles I had recently bought. But as I walked deeper into the living room, I felt my stomach tighten. The scent was stronger in the bedroom. That's when I saw it. A red hoodie, carelessly draped over the back of a chair like it belonged there. I didn't own a red hoodie. In fact, I didn't own anything that color. I froze, staring at it, my heart pounding in my chest. I looked around the room, scanning for any other signs, and that's when I noticed the faintest trace of lipstick on the pillow, a deep shade I'd never worn. My mind raced. Was it possible? Had I missed something? When Ethan came home, I couldn't keep my feelings inside anymore. I had to ask. "Ethan, what's this?" I pointed to the hoodie. "Whose is this? And why does the room smell like perfume that's not mine?" He seemed unfazed, almost too calm as he walked over and shrugged it off with an explanation that made my head spin. "Oh, it's just my cousin. She came over to visit for a few days." He didn't seem bothered by my questioning at all, but I noticed a slight nervous twitch in his eye. "She's from out of state, you know? I told you about her before. She borrowed some of my clothes and left that behind." I didn't buy it. Not for a second. Ethan had never once mentioned a cousin coming to visit, and even if she had, she wouldn't have left behind something so obviously out of place in our home. Something about it felt forced. The whole thing felt like a cover-up, but I didn't know what to say. My gut was screaming at me that something was off, that I was missing something crucial, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was overreacting. But the unease stayed with me, lingering in the back of my mind, especially when Ethan continued acting distant. He never mentioned his cousin again, and when I tried to bring it up, he dismissed it as no big deal. The hoodie was gone the next day, but the perfume smell lingered. And in the silence that followed, I couldn't help but feel the weight of something I didn't want to face. Something was changing, and I wasn't sure how to stop it. A few days later, things took a turn that I couldn't ignore. I was having coffee with Lena, my best friend since childhood, when she dropped a bombshell that sent chills down my spine. Lena was always the level-headed one, the friend who had my back through everything, and she wasn't the type to stir the pot. But when she looked me dead in the eyes, her voice low and serious, I knew something was wrong. "I saw Ethan," she said, her words carrying a weight I wasn't prepared for. "I saw him at that Italian place you guys love, the one on Oak Street. He was with another woman, and it didn't look like just friends." I felt a rush of confusion flood through me. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though my heart was racing. Lena hesitated for a moment before pulling out her phone. "I took a picture, just in case you wouldn't believe me." She handed it to me, and I felt my hands tremble as I stared at the photo. There, sitting at a table for two, was Ethan, and beside him was a woman I didn't recognize, her hand resting on his arm as they shared an intimate laugh. It didn't look casual, didn't look like a friendly dinner. It looked like they were more than just colleagues or acquaintances. My mind went blank. I could hardly comprehend what I was seeing. Ethan, the man who had promised me everything, the one who had made me feel so special, was sitting there, looking at this woman with a tenderness that felt too familiar. I didn't know how to process it. My stomach twisted into knots. I couldn't wait to confront him. That night, I asked him outright, trying to keep the calm tone I had learned to fake. "I saw the photo, Ethan. What is this? Who is she?" At first, he looked taken aback, almost offended by the question, but then his face changed, and the defensiveness crept in. "It's nothing," he said quickly, his voice forced, trying to pass it off. She's just a friend, an old colleague I ran into. We were catching up. But I wasn't buying it. I couldn't. His explanations felt too rehearsed, too convenient. I pressed further, trying to understand. You were laughing with her, Ethan. That doesn't look like just a friend. He grew agitated, his tone turning sharp. You're overreacting, he said. Lena must have misunderstood. She's probably just jealous of our relationship. I told you, it's nothing. I didn't know what to say. The man I thought I knew was standing in front of me, lying without hesitation. The anger bubbled up inside me, but I held it back. Instead, I looked at him, trying to see the truth beneath the excuses. But the more he denied it, the more I started to question everything I thought was real. When I told Lena what happened, she was furious. He's gaslighting you. I can't believe he's getting away with this. You know what you saw. He's trying to make you doubt yourself. But I couldn't help but feel conflicted. I was torn between trusting Ethan, the man I had spent years with, and believing my best friend, who had never once steered me wrong. The distance between us grew, and soon the tension between Lena and me began to show. She was angry that I wasn't confronting the truth, and I was angry at her for making me face something I wasn't ready to accept. The situation started to spiral. I was caught in the middle, unsure of who to trust, Ethan or Lena, and it felt like my world was crumbling around me. The more I thought about it, the more I realized the signs had been there all along, and I had ignored them. But now, with this photo in my hand, everything was starting to make sense, and it hurt more than I ever could have imagined. It was a rainy afternoon when I found it. I had gone to Ethan's laptop to look up something, just a quick check, and for some reason I noticed he had left it open. Usually he was careful with his devices, always logging out, always keeping things locked away. But that day, for whatever reason, he had forgotten to log out of his Instagram account. Curiosity pulled me in. At first, I told myself it was harmless, just something to pass the time while I waited for him to come back. But as I stared at the screen, I noticed something odd. There was a new account. It didn't look like his usual profile, the one with our pictures together, his usual posts. This one was completely different. The name was nondescript, a jumble of random letters and numbers, but the profile picture was clear enough. It was of a woman's face, one I didn't recognize. I should have closed the laptop right there. I should have walked away, but I couldn't. My heart began racing as I clicked through the messages. Dozens of them, all flirtatious, some explicit, some playful. And it wasn't just one woman. There were several, each one different from the next, different types of women. Some were blonde, some were brunettes, others with darker skin tones. There were messages from him to each of them, always with the same tone. Charming, sweet, overly attentive. You're so beautiful. I can't stop thinking about you. Can't wait to see you again soon. It made my stomach turn. My head was spinning, my mind trying to piece together what I was seeing. It wasn't just one slip-up, not just a one-time mistake. This was an ongoing pattern. He had been messaging all these women, playing them the same way he had played me. I felt like the room was spinning. My breath caught in my throat as I realized what I was looking at. I couldn't even process it. I didn't know if I should be angry, hurt, or just numb. The world around me seemed to blur as I stared at the screen, frozen in disbelief. But deep down, I knew that this was it. There was no denying it now. The man I had loved, the one I had trusted, had been living a double life. But even with the evidence in front of me, I still clung to that sliver of hope. I wasn't ready to accept the truth. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance to fix things. I closed the laptop, my hands shaking, and waited for Ethan to return. My mind raced with what I would say, what I would ask. Part of me wanted to confront him immediately, to throw it all in his face and demand answers. But another part of me, the part that still wanted to believe in him, hoped he would confess on his own. Maybe he would tell me the truth, and we could work through it. When Ethan finally walked through the door, I felt my heart sink. The air between us was thick, and I knew he could feel it too. The distance between us felt tangible, like a wall had been built that neither of us could cross. I had to ask. I couldn't keep living with this secret in my chest. Ethan, I said, my voice trembling, What is this? What's going on with all these messages? I showed him the burner account, hoping for the truth, for an ounce of honesty. He looked at the screen, his face going pale. For a moment, he said nothing, but then, just like before, he fell into his pattern of excuses, trying to play it off. "Babe, it's not what it looks like," he said quickly, his words rushing out like he had rehearsed them. "It's just some harmless fun. I wasn't serious about any of it. I was bored, and I thought it'd be okay, but it's nothing. Just forget about it." My heart dropped. "How long, Ethan?" I whispered, barely able to keep my voice steady. "How long have you been doing this?" His silence spoke volumes. The weight of his words, or lack of words, sank in. I had the answers I needed, even if I didn't want to hear them. The man I had loved had lied to me, had been betraying me for months, and still, he couldn't own up to it. The tension in the room was suffocating as Ethan tried to explain himself, but no explanation could cover the truth. His words fell flat, meaningless as I stared at him, trying to make sense of the man in front of me. "It's just harmless fun," he repeated, his voice lacking any real remorse. "You're overreacting. There's nothing to this. I was just messing around." I felt the rage rising in me, the disbelief slowly turning into anger. How could he be so casual, so indifferent about everything he'd done? How could he sit there and act like this wasn't the betrayal of everything we had built together? It wasn't just about the messages. It was the lies, the years of pretending, the facade he had carefully crafted. He hadn't just been unfaithful physically. He had deceived me emotionally, pulling me into a relationship that was never what it seemed.